Welcome everybody to today's webinar. We're going to give it a few minutes so everyone can make their way in, and then we will get started from there. So hope you are having a wonderful Tuesday wherever you are in the world. Um, and yeah, like I said, we'll just give it a few minutes so everyone can make their way in, get their audio set up so they can hear us, and we'll start soon. But thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Um, and yeah, we'll get started in just a few seconds. Yeah, for folks just making their way on to the webinar, welcome. We're going to give it just a little bit more time so everyone can make it in. Then we'll get started. So thanks for your patience and bearing with us as we wait for folks to trickle in. Cool. We'll just give it another 30 or so seconds now, and then we'll get started. Like I said, hope everyone is having a wonderful Tuesday wherever in the world you are. We're very excited about this presentation, so hope you enjoy, find it informative, and it's a good addition to your Tuesday schedule. So with that said, let's now get started. And we're really excited that you've joined us for this webinar on how Rancher Labs improve development efficiency and security with a specific focus on reducing risk that can come from open source software. My name is Andy Drukarev, and I'm on the team here at FOSSA. I'll be your host for today's webinar. Before I go over our agenda and introduce our featured guest, Hayden Barnes, the Senior Engineering Manager at Rancher Labs, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping points. First, we'll save time at the end for a Q&A, so please post any questions you have in the questions section of the BrightTalk console. Next, this webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to you after the event. Finally, we at FOSSA will be following up with you after the webinar as well with a few additional resources to see if there's anything we can do to help your organization. Now, let's take a look at our agenda. So, as you'll see, we'll get started with introductions, and broadly, this discussion will really cover two primary themes: general best practices for open source management, including some specific steps your organization can take, as well as a more specific look at how Rancher Labs has used FOSSA, which we hope will be useful for organizations that may be further along in their evaluation process of FOSSA or other software composition analysis solutions. Now let's start the presentation. We will start the presentation by taking a look at some of the challenges Rancher Labs faced with open source management and its process for evaluating software composition analysis tools. We'll then shift to Rancher's experience implementing that tooling and some important takeaways that can make a big difference in having open source management be an integrated part of software development. Finally, we'll zoom out and take a look at the big picture of reducing the license compliance and vulnerability concerns that can come with open source, and how Rancher has been able to make significant progress in moving to a more proactive posture. Now, I'm really excited to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Hayden Barnes. Now, as I mentioned, Hayden is the Senior Engineering Manager at Rancher, but he also has a legal background. He started his career in law, so we're really interested in getting his insight on open source license compliance and strategies around implementing license compliance policies, in addition to some of the technical topics that we'll cover. Now, thrilled to hand things off to you, Hayden, and to start, wondering if you might be able to share a bit more about your background and your current work at Rancher.
Great. So my name's Hayden Barnes. In a previous life, I was a full-time attorney. I did commercial and technology law with a solo practice. I consulted with a lot of larger firms who needed expertise on technology-related issues. By happenstance, I started a small open source project after years of contributing to open source projects on the side that actually got some traction and became its own kind of indie open source startup slash consulting firm. And that grew and eventually consumed enough of my time that I made the leap from legal tech into tech engineering in the open source space full time. So I've seen the challenges of open source both from the legal side and from the engineering side. I think that gives me a bit of unique perspective. My specific area of focus is on Windows and Linux cross compatibility. My area is Windows subsystem for Linux. Previously, that was my focus at Canonical, where I worked on the Ubuntu desktop team. As part of that, I was a big part of the WSL community and organized the first WSL conference. Nowadays, I work on Rancher. I run a handful of teams, including the Rancher DevOps team, the Rancher Docs and DevRel teams, as well as the Windows on Rancher team, which plays into my expertise on Windows Linux compatibility. But I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Andy, and I love talking about this. So a little bit about Rancher Labs. It was founded in 2014. It was acquired by SUSE in late 2020. We now have a full stack from the operating system all the way up to the Kubernetes ecosystem. Rancher is unique in the Kubernetes ecosystem in that we are fully open source. The version of Rancher that our major enterprise customers purchase support for is the same exact code base, the same exact build that anyone can pull from Docker Hub at any time. So same images, same code base, and all of our development, all of the messiness is out there in the public. We are unique in that place. There's no community edition. There's no separate branches, used just for enterprise. If you purchase support for Rancher, you get a nice color change, that reflects that you're running the supported version. Of course, you get access to our top tier support and professional services. But other than that, everything we do from the Kubernetes engine all the way up to our UI is open source. And the other thing that distinguishes Rancher is we are not tied into one specific cloud platform. So we work not only with GCP, AWS, Azure, but we do on-prem, we do hybrid, we do multi-cloud. We have a hosted offering, and a lot of our customers come to Rancher because it gives them a lot more flexibility than getting stuck into one specific cloud ecosystem or one specific vendor. So, for example, Rancher plays well with vSphere. So if you're a VMware customer but looking for Rancher to manage across, your on-prem and in the cloud, Rancher can do both. So that's one of the some of the unique aspects of Rancher is that we're completely open source and that we're very agnostic in terms of where you run Rancher and how you run Rancher. So it presents some unique challenges across the board, but it's what distinguishes Rancher from other Kubernetes solutions in the market.
Great. Now, a few quick words about FOSSA. We provide technology to help organizations manage open source risk, so license compliance, vulnerabilities, things of that nature, just automating steps of that process and making it a bit easier. And you'll hear more about that as we move through the presentation. But to get started, as we kind of start to tackle some of the meat of our discussion, Hayden, I'd love if we might be able to start by discussing some of the challenges that Rancher originally faced with open source management.
Gotcha. So Rancher has our flagship product, the Rancher Manager. That is our single pane of glass into your entire Kubernetes ecosystem. But as part of that, there are literally hundreds of components that get built into Rancher Manager. And we have dozens of other projects in incubation stages that will eventually be folded into the project as they mature. So, for example, we have two Kubernetes engines, RKE and RKE2, which is based on the popular K3s Kubernetes distribution. We also have Fleet, which is our GitOps solution, which was folded into Rancher Manager. We have Longhorn, which is our storage solution, a CNCF project, which is folded into Rancher. We have Harvester, also a CNCF project that will enable you to run VMs within your Kubernetes solution. So overall, Rancher has over 200 separate open source repositories containing components that eventually become part of what you get with Rancher. And when you install Rancher from Docker Hub, it's going to pull down even more containers and additional components. So there are a lot of projects, a lot of pieces, thousands of dependencies across dozens of projects that we have to manage the risk for. And we have enterprise customers who need assurances about risk. We have government customers. We have customers who we have a white label solution for customers who want to take Rancher and offer it internally on their own hardware. So those customers have risk that they're faced with as well. And managing all of that by hand is not sustainable. I'm a big proponent of open source sustainability and using tools and practices like automation that ensure sustainability for open source projects in the long run. And manual was not where we were going. So when it came time to look where we wanted to be, automation with a tool like FOSSA was, we ended up going with FOSSA, and I think we'll talk about why. And it just made sense to automate this.
Got it. Now to your point about making your selection. Obviously, there are a bunch of different tools on the market that can automate, that can help with open source management. So I would love to hear a bit about your evaluation process, what the most important factors for you, what you were looking for in an open source management solution, why you selected FOSSA, and then as you reflect back, if you might have any guidance for anyone that's on this webinar that might find themselves currently in a similar situation to where you were a few months back.
Sure. Well, I was tasked with finding a solution for both CVE scanning and license dependency scanning. And right off the bat, FOSSA checked both boxes. We also liked that FOSSA was open source in and of itself. So we knew that the team and working on FOSSA had the same open source mindset that we did. We were able to work closely with the team at FOSSA. We were able to integrate FOSSA directly into our CI/CD development pipelines relatively easily. We integrated FOSSA with our identity management system, which was Okta. These are all boxes that we looked at that FOSSA checked for us. We have alerts set up. So we talked about how many different repositories we have at Rancher. And different repositories are part of different projects that have different project managers and different engineering managers. And by being able to set custom reporting up when a CVE or license issue is detected, for example, in Longhorn, the engineering manager and the project manager and the engineer assigned to security for that project automatically get an email. We also liked the customizable reporting features in FOSSA that allowed us to automatically generate compliance reports for what we are publishing. And that, we did look at some open source solutions that were community based, but we liked that FOSSA had the backing of a company that we could work with. And that goes back to the sustainability. We wouldn't want to adopt a solution that we had to maintain ourselves and fork and maintain in the long run. With FOSSA, we feel like we have a true collaborative relationship between our organization and FOSSA, which some of the other turnkey solutions that we've looked at, we'd have to kind of shoehorn in, and we didn't have that same collaborative aspect too. So we've really enjoyed working with FOSSA. As the product develops, we take advantage of more features in FOSSA as they evolve, and have even been able to give feedback to FOSSA that's improved the product. And we see that since implementing FOSSA. So in terms of general advice for looking at solutions for this, one, finding a solution that does both security and licensing scanning, that's a challenge in and of itself. And FOSSA is great in that it does both. And then the other consideration is sustainability. And is your solution that you're picking going to be something that is backed by a large community or a company? Are you going to end up potentially in 5 years having to maintain the solution that you pick yourself? And that's not necessarily sustainable, especially for small or medium-sized companies. So FOSSA, I see, plays into that theme of open source sustainability because it has the backing of company and continues to evolve, and we can collaborate in that open source space with them.
Got it. It makes a lot of sense. And as we move forward, you've made your decision to pick FOSSA, and then you get to work on implementation. And I know when we're talking about a developer tool like FOSSA, that this is obviously a very important step in the process to make sure bringing in this automation doesn't disrupt your existing processes. And so I'm curious what your experience was like with implementing FOSSA specifically, and then again, zooming out, what some of the key steps might be for organizations that are generally bringing on board a new tool to help with open source management.
Yeah. So when we looked at FOSSA, we looked at the different scanning options, and we tried out at that time was the next generation scanning tool. It's now been GA'd and is the primary scanning tool, but it's written in Haskell. It is very fast, and we began implementing that directly into our CI/CD system, which is based on Drone. And we found that relatively simple. It was 3 or 4 lines of YAML that we added, and it's the API key. That was our first step. We first used GitHub authentication to log into the FOSSA portal. We since upgraded that to Okta, which makes it super easy to get to, especially for our users in legal and product that don't necessarily use GitHub extensively. We then moved from calling the FOSSA CLI tool directly in our DevOps pipeline. Our DevOps team developed a plugin for Drone, which uses FOSSA, and we open source that. So we're an open source company. Our DevOps team is an engineering team, just like any other engineering team, and we want to contribute to the community. So we wrote that plugin, and it's available from Rancher. if you're using Drone to deploy FOSSA as a plugin. The big challenge we faced when we initially launched was, FOSSA scans for licensing issues and CVEs. And we certainly discovered we had some tech debt to clear. And that was a bit of a hurdle. It was something we had to clear to, come into compliance. There were certainly some outdated dependencies that needed to be updated. There were some licenses that needed to be, where the license detection on FOSSA has dramatically improved. Occasionally you have to go in and actually double check that repository to make sure you're compliant. But that was done relatively quickly. We divided that work amongst a handful of engineers, and we cleared it in a couple weeks. So once we cleared that tech debt of some of those outdated dependencies and identifying the proper licenses, we've been able to shift to a much more proactive, aggressive posture. So we got those detections down to just a handful, and ideally we run at 0. But then when something new is detected, those teams are automatically alerted, and they can make time and usually clear those within a few days is the goal as an organization, particularly high-level CVEs. And if for some reason, a project gets relicensed into something that is not compatible, we can address it there. In terms of general advice for organizations implementing SCA tooling, you really want to minimize the impact. Being able to incorporate Drone directly into our CI/CD, and then we went one step further and wrote a plugin to make it even easier to deploy. Again, over 200 repositories required updates to their Drone YAML file, but we're able to divvy that up and do it in waves, and minimize the impact on the existing roadmap that our engineers are already working feverishly on. So I would just plan for that initial tech debt and have a plan to clear that those first sets of detections. And then once you do that, you're in a much better place to be proactive moving forward.
So at this point, would like to take another brief step back and touch on what I think is a pretty universal challenge for engineering leaders like yourself, but also legal and security teams, which is making open source risk management efficient, repeatable, and part of the day-to-day development workflows. Now, that's obviously a very broad topic, but I know there are a few areas here that have been pillars of your approach.
Yeah, so we have a centralized DevOps team, which was able to integrate the scanning directly into the build pipelines, even without the intervention of those engineering teams directly. So we offloaded that from the engineering teams and did it ourselves as a DevOps team. But then we needed buy-in from the engineering managers and the project managers on those projects, because all of a sudden they're going to get emails now that their software has CVEs or potential licensing issues. And what we did is we basically recorded a brief internal webinar of how to triage those internally. I think it was 20 minutes long, and we were able to share that internally and bring engineers up to speed relatively quickly on what they needed to do within FOSSA. The FOSSA interface is relatively easy to use. There was not a huge learning curve. It's easy within the FOSSA portal to see where dependencies are being detected and trace them down to where they might be being pulled in, especially those deep dependencies where you have dependency on dependency on dependency. And clearing those and getting that initial tech debt clear, that was a challenge. You kind of had to we had to nudge some other engineering managers to make sure that their engineers got time. But after the webinar went out and we got the engineers oriented to the interface, again, it took a handful of engineers, a few spare hours each week, and we were able to clear that within a couple weeks. So once they saw how easy it was and low maintenance and otherwise runs automatically, the buy-in was good. Engineers, they have what they want to work on. Project managers have projects to complete, sprints that they don't, where they've set aside specific tasks. They don't want those being interrupted by incoming, issues that take up from other roadmap items. And then engineering managers have deliverables to make. So understanding that and being as low impact as possible, and notifying them once things get cleared, and then once they know how easy it is to handle them once they come in, very very little pushback or concerns once we got past that first hurdle of clearing everything in the backlog. So nowadays we see things cleared within a few days for most teams.
Got it. I guess just to dig into one of the bullet points a little bit further, when you talk about developing and implementing policies that govern your use of different open source licenses and vulnerabilities, um, you know, I think there are a few different ways to do this. For vulnerabilities, different organizations have this different risk tolerance. So some, will want to prioritize remediating the vast majority, some by certain CV score. And similarly for license compliance, some organizations are a hard no on copyleft all the time. Some are soft no some of the time, and sort of wondering, what your thought process here was here, and kind of what worked for you.
Right. So we are a hard no on copyleft licenses. We avoid GPL family. We are Apache 2 first, MIT BSD second. Because our white label solution and our hosted solutions, we can't have AGPL in there. We can't have GPL in there. It needs to be permissively licensed. So being able to implement, we have a organization-wide licensing policy. Implementing that in FOSSA and the scanning policy was point and click. I mean, that was fairly straightforward. So we have a policy and we implemented it in the portal. That was easy. When it comes to CVEs, we are a no CVE policy. So any CVE of any score, we try to clear within a couple days. If it's low, it may get a couple extra days, slightly lower priority from specific engineering teams, but we don't tolerate CVEs. It's just simply not something we want in our product, especially considering how widely used our product is, and how a vulnerability in the stack could open customers and either paid or community users to vulnerability. So that's where our stance is, and other organizations may have different tolerances. My own legal background leads me to be pretty hard and fast about GPL family licenses and not permitting those into the code base, and responding to every CVE just from a risk basis. But we're able to do that with the automation that FOSSA provides, and that folds back into my big theme, which is making open source sustainable. I've talked about the sustainability of open source from a funding perspective. I've talked about the sustainability of open source from maintainers, but FOSSA has been really critical for making open source sustainable from this risk standpoint for us. And we think it's a great tool. So
yeah, no, great insight. Thanks, Hayden. Now, just looking at the big picture, and would love just to have a few final words from you on where Rancher is on your open source management journey. So, you've discussed a lot of the ways you're currently using FOSSA, but if there are any other use cases or, parts of that collaboration that you'd like to call out, as well as what's in the cards moving forward, and then just general big picture advice for other organizations. Obviously, open source management, it's an evolving practice, I would say. And so as teams look to develop a more advanced approach to addressing and mitigating open source risk, if there's anything that you view as particularly important moving forward.
Yeah, well, we've cut the number of open CVEs at any given time. We've reduced the length of open CVEs in our code base. We've gotten much greater visibility into our security stance, and that is a big push, I think, across the entire open source ecosystem, but also within SUSE Rancher. We can provide reports on full license compliance to other projects, to our customers, to the community, so they have the assurance that they're not inheriting risk from using some or all of our projects. In general, we've moved from a reactive security and licensing approach with reduced visibility to a much more proactive security and licensing approach with really detailed visibility. I mean, I can run a report. I can go grab a report that we pulled from an API script and ensure that a specific a random go dependency in one of our many repositories, again over 200, is been checked, and check that license and know that there's not an outstanding critical CVE on it. One example was there was a recent Go library that was failing to generate proper random number generations, and that popped up in a couple projects, and we were able to remediate that basically within hours of that detection. And that's something that prior to FOSSA may not have even have been remediated or noticed. So again, it's gone from a reactive approach to a proactive approach with tons of visibility, to the point where in some cases, even myself, I've seen alerts pop up and gone and made a tweak to remediate a CVE within hours, and then closed it within minutes, thanks to FOSSA. So those are the two key points there. My advice for organizations dealing with open source management challenges is automation. And I guess it depends on your size. So if you're a small open source project, a small team, FOSSA is relatively easy to implement. You don't have to roll your own solution here. It's ready to go. For larger teams, what we like is that FOSSA allows us to sort projects into teams, have specific alerts for those teams, give those teams their own dashboard so they can see their specific projects. So it scales to allow organizations that have multiple teams with their dozens of repos each to get their single pane of glass into their licensing and security posture there. Getting buy-in, of course, from who is going to be implementing it, either your DevOps team or the teams themselves, and then demonstrating to them, once you clear that initial backlog you may have, that it really becomes fairly light touch. And you want a solution that does not impact your overall engineering team velocity. Here, a few hours a week at most can be dedicated to, of one engineer can be dedicated to ensuring full security and licensing compliance for a project used by hundreds of millions. So that's open source sustainability. That's what FOSSA has been able to provide. And there's other solutions that were out there, but FOSSA did both, and that's what we liked about them. What's coming in the FOSSA Rancher partnership? We have a meeting coming up. We are seeing some customers asking for improvements in their SBOM, their software bill of materials, and we can already provide those. But I think we have some feedback for FOSSA on some additional fields we might want to see there. FOSSA so far has been super helpful in responding to all of our feedback as a customer, as a partner, and implementing what we've seen, areas, we've had needs, and we're really looking forward to continuing that partnership as FOSSA improves and more features get built in, and the offering is refined, and it just helps us be more productive and more responsive to the community, provide our paid support customers more assurances, and continue to then feedback improvements into FOSSA. So we're really excited about continuing to work with FOSSA moving forward. And that goes all the way up, not just here at the engineering management level, but to the upper levels of the company, who are very pleased with what we've done with FOSSA.
Great to hear that we've been able to be a good fit for you and for Rancher and the team. So that actually wraps the majority of our presentation today. We do have time for a few questions, so feel free to submit anything that's on your mind if you have not already. It looks like our first question is that, Hayden, you mentioned Rancher's no GPL policy. In the event that you do find a GPL license dependency that's important to your product, how do you work around that?
So occasionally we see projects change licenses, and if there is a change to a GPL family license, or just a license that's not going to work for us, first we look to see if there's been a fork of the previously licensed version that we can collaborate on and build on. In some cases, we will make the fork ourselves. It depends on the library being used. If it's a very stable library that isn't going to get a lot of updates or modifications and doesn't have a lot of support burden in and of itself, we may just fork that previous version under the more permissive license and continue to use the library there. In some cases, and then also we will occasionally look for alternative libraries, particularly in the Go or the Python ecosystem. There's sometimes a handful of libraries to choose from that implement the same functionality that doesn't require a lot of refactoring. But then what I was going to get to before is that very occasionally we won't see a fork and there's not an alternative library, and we will need to re-implement the library functionality in a clean room situation. So that's happened a couple times. But you have options, and you evaluate all those options when it happens. So we've been able to, steer clear of any licenses that would open us up to additional risk or impose additional burdens that organizationally we're not interested in providing, and our customers want to avoid. So you have a number of options when that happens, and we kind of take it one step at a time when that happens to see what we can do. But worst case scenario, we clean room it.
Got it. And the other question we have at this point, and I think this would stem from some of your comments, Hayden, on getting engineering buy-in from your other functional teams, is do you have any suggestions on building a culture where developers are strongly invested in license compliance and vulnerability management?
Yeah. I'm going to be really realistic and say that most engineers are not going to be passionate about licensing compliance. It's kind of one of those legal things. It's kind of a headache. They may be more interested in security from a technical standpoint, but even then, mitigating minor CVEs is probably not at their top of the list of what they want to be doing. So what we've been able to do with FOSSA within Rancher is simply make it simple and low impact on their existing roadmaps and their sprints. So they get the email alerts that's been detected. A security engineer will follow up with them to see where they are. And having cleared that initial hurdle, once we got FOSSA implemented and cleared everything in the backlog, again, it's been fairly low touch, and having it automated and then notifying those teams as needed. Most of those issues can be cleared, clean room projects aside, most of those issues can be cleared usually within a few hours of alerting. So, ideally you want your engineers to be just as excited about licensing compliance and every CVE that comes along. But engineers have their own passions. They have their own interests. They have what's in front of them. They have their own deliverables to their managers that they need to get done. And sometimes these things coming in can feel like extras. But by making it really easy to respond to with the FOSSA portal and alerts, specifically, so they only get alerts for their specific project. They're not getting alerts for other projects. So what they get is actually actionable and something they're going to want to pay attention to, and then be able to remediate it relatively quickly. Is, I think, how you get compliance and get a culture where even if they're not excited about it, it's not a huge burden to handle. And they do understand the importance of licensing and compliance and security in a product, but the goal is to make it easy and light touch, and I think FOSSA has allowed us to do that.
Makes sense. So that's all the questions that we have. And with that, I think we will wrap up this webinar. A final word will be, if folks want to get in touch with you, Hayden, is there a good way for them to reach out with any questions or follow-ups from this session?
Sure. So I'm fairly active on Twitter, probably a little too active. I'm at Unix Terminal. You can also find me on GitHub at Sir Redbeard. You can also drop me an email at hayden.barnes@SUSE.com. So lots of ways to reach out to me, lots of ways to get in touch with me. Follow me on Twitter, send me, my DMs are open on Twitter. Find my GitHub, or just drop me an email is perfectly fine. So LinkedIn too. If you want to add me on LinkedIn, I'll add you there, and we can chat there as well. So
great. In the next few minutes, I will be adding in that contact information to the webinar sort of description. So just give us a few minutes, and then if you come back to the homepage for this webinar, you'll be able to find all of that information. So with that, we will wrap up. Again, thank you so much to everyone who took time out of your day to attend this webinar. We hope it was useful, whether you are currently considering tooling or whether you're simply just looking to refine your existing approach. And thank you so much, Hayden, for taking the time, and really appreciate your insights here. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone for being here, and hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.